Spirits like this. I tip my hat to Fred for his long and worthy life and your time in baseball, your career in baseball. My career is kind of more like Al Gianfrido or maybe Bo Belinsky. And only in a room like this can I say those names, and you know exactly who I'm talking about. So I caught lightning in a bottle for just a short period of time, and so that's what I came here today to tell you about. I grew up in a baseball family. Mostly my mother, who was a St. Louis gal and a diehard Cardinal fan, and we lived in New York, so I was a Yankee fan growing up. And we went on the first of several spring training baseball trips in 1961, which, as we all know, was a magical year in baseball. And it was a magical experience for me because we went to St. Pete, of course, because in St. Petersburg, both the Yankees and the Cardinals were training simultaneously. So it's a wonderful location for us, given our loyalties. And very first morning, I showed up with my little autograph book, which looked exactly like Fred's little autograph book there. Showed up out at Al Lang Field, outside of the stadium, to get autographs. And I'd never seen a Major League Baseball player in the flesh. And it blew my mind that within a few minutes, these guys got out of their taxi cabs and they came up and I got a few autographs. And I think within 10 minutes of my standing out there in front of the clubhouse watching these guys come in, this old grizzled guy with a faded baseball cap, who I later discovered everybody knew as Baseball Jack, he was like the clubhouse attendant, walked straight up to me and looked at me straight in the eye and he said, "Hey kid, want to be a bat boy today?" If the heavens had opened up and a choir of angels sang the Hallelujah chorus, I couldn't have lifted my spirits more. And I was sort of struck like Paul on the road to Damascus. I know I can use these spiritual analogies here in Chautauqua, because I was dumbstruck. I couldn't even speak. And my eyes were wide and my mouth was open, and he kind of took that as an assent. And he put his hand on my shoulders, walked me through the clubhouse and into the dugout. I was the visiting team bat boy for the day. It was the Milwaukee Braves. And within 15 minutes of showing up at this ballpark, I was in the dugout with Hank Aaron and Warren Spahn and Eddie Matthews and Johnny Logan and all of these legends of the Braves. And so I spent this day, my first day at spring training, as the bat boy for the Milwaukee Braves. And we were there for about 2 weeks. So the next day I had just enough New York chutzpah in me that the next day I showed up early looking for Baseball Jack. And I tracked him down and I said, "Jack, you guys need a bat boy today?" And he said, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, the Cardinals' regular bat boy went back from vacation to school, and the Cardinals are looking for somebody." I ended up spending 10 days as the bat boy with the Cardinals and Stan Musial, and rode on the bus to the road trip games. And the one quick story, I grew up as a Mickey Mantle was my guy. Anybody here grew up with Mickey Mantle as your guy? Mickey was if Mickey had 2 home runs, it was a great day. If he was 0 for 4, I didn't want to talk to anybody. It was just miserable. Well, one day the Cardinals are playing the Yankees, and a reporter grabbed Mickey with his little tape recorder and sat him down for an interview, and he happened to be in the Cardinals dugout where this interview was taking place. And I looked over and I realized, that's my dugout. I can go into the dugout. And so I walked over and I was shaking. My body was shaking. And I sat down about 6 inches next to Mickey Mantle. And he kind of looked over like, what is that? But he kept going in his interview. And to this moment, I'll never forget what it was like sitting in a major league dugout next to Mickey Mantle. And one of those moments like my wedding day or my firstborn child. It's one of those moments I will never forget. Okay, so finish 1961. I got to go back to school. 2 years later, we go back down again. We skip 62. 2 years later, we go back down again. And what do? Of course, I look for Baseball Jack. Where's Jack? And I said, hey, remember me? I was your bat boy a couple of years ago. Anybody need a bat boy? And he said, yeah, the Mets. And by then I'd become a Met fan, because by 62 Mets was the first year, so I was really on board with the Mets. And he said, the Mets need a bat boy for the next week or 10 days, however long I was down there. And so I became the New York Mets bat boy. They gave me this uniform. I'll pass this around. These are all the guys that I've tracked down over the years on the team. And here's the original photo of me and Casey, and it's signed up there. It says, to Dave Casey Stengel. I'll pass these around. I keep an eye on it as it goes around. One of the things when you see that picture, they gave me a uniform for the time that I was with them. And one of the things was, when I outfitted myself in the uniform, they had to give me a pair of spikes. And they kind of rummaged around in a box and pulled out some old spikes that they'd had from last year, the previous season. And so they gave me the spikes, and as I'm putting them on, I noticed in the tongue of the spikes, written in the tongue is the name Hornsby.
Oh, wow.
Because if you look it up, like Casey used to say, you can look it up. If you can look it up. 1962, for one season, Rogers Hornsby was a coach for the New York Mets. And so he had his spikes left in the locker room, and they gave me Rogers Hornsby's spikes, which I wore for about 10 days. No, they're not in here. The spikes aren't in there. So a magical time being with the Mets for that 10 days. And then at 64, trifecta, we went down again. And Jack told me, but both, at that point, of course, let's see, the Cardinals and the Mets were both in St. Pete at that point. The Yankees had moved on. But the Cardinals and the Mets both had regular bat boys. So I couldn't sign on with them. But what I did was, I was kind of like Gaylord Perry, just kind of pitching wherever I had a chance. Whenever a visiting team came in, I would meet the boss, or I'd see if Jack could get me a job. And so I signed on for one day at a time with a number of different teams during that spring of 64. And the two that really stand out, one was, I was with the Pirates one day when Clemente was on the team. And I remember that because I just remember Roberto Clemente's presence. It was like being around royalty. Clemente had such an aura about, such dignity that, I'll just never forget being there as Clemente's bat boy. And the other time that I remember vividly was with the Dodgers one day. And it happened to be a day that Sandy Koufax pitched. So I was Koufax's bat boy that day. And Koufax, one thing I remember, well, you get these snapshots from that experience that stay with you. One thing that I remember was Koufax made it to first base, which for those of you who know Koufax's batting record was something of a minor miracle that Koufax made first base. I think he had hooked up in his pitcher's duel with Ernie Broglio, and they went 8 innings scoreless. And Broglio bested him. I'll bring up Broglio later on if I get a chance. But Koufax got to first base, and I ran him out his Dodger jacket. And I remember him thanking me and putting on his Dodger jacket on base. And then the other thing I remember about that game was going back into the clubhouse after the game and looking over and seeing Koufax with his arm in a big bucket of ice. Because he only had 2 more years left. This was the pinnacle of his career in 64. It was right at the pinnacle. He only had 1 year left because he retired at the end of 65. And on there, just as a kid, you see the strange scene of a pitcher with his arm just buried in ice after pitching those 8 innings in that pitcher's duel. So let's see, I think I'm running down my time. I'm a little over 10, so I'll wait to the question and answer session, and because I'm running out of time, I'll just plant this seed. If you get a chance and we got enough time, ask me please how I ended up spending a weekend in Johnny Bench's bed, okay? Fred came out earlier, so I'll come out. If you ask me in the Q&A, how was it that, right in front of my wife, I'm gonna come out with this, how it was that I ended up spending a weekend in Johnny Bench's bed. True story. Okay, thank you folks. Everybody knows this. Worst trade in baseball history. People always ask, like, when you were a bat boy, just like with Fred, when you're a bat boy, you get to know any of the players. You know, I was such a short-termer that I really didn't get to know on an ongoing basis many of the guys, except for Ernie Broglio. He was the nicest guy in the world. He kind of took me under his wing. For the next few years after I was a bat boy, whenever the Cardinals and then the Cubs came into New York, where I was living, I would go down to the hotel and I'd look up Ernie Broglio, and he'd take me out to lunch and get me tickets to the game. And so I maintained this nice long-term relationship with Ernie. And then in 1967, 66, he got sent down to the minor leagues. 67, he was pitching for the Buffalo Bisons, for those of you around here. You remember this? Broglio was a Buffalo Bisons starting pitcher for the season 67. And that was the year that I turned 17 years old, and my driver's license turned into a 24-hour-a-day license in New York back in the day. And I looked up in the sporting news, and the Bisons were playing in Syracuse, New York that weekend. And I convinced my parents to let me have the car this day, my 17th birthday, to drive upstate and find Ernie Broglio. So I drove up, looked up the hotel where the Bisons were staying, knocked on Broglio's door, and he took me in, and we went out with his roommate, who's a guy named Dom Zaney, for anybody who really knows their trivia. And so at one point he said, well, where are you staying tonight? And I said, I was going to sleep in my car. I'm 17 years old. What am I going to do? I'm going to sleep in my car in a rest area on the highway. He said, no, you can't do that. I'll find a room for you in the team hotel. So we went around the team to the hotel, meeting the other players and asking if anybody had an extra bed in their room. Some of the guys on that team were Jake Wood, for those of you who remember that name, Jimmy Stewart, not the actor, but the outfielder, and Don Zimmer was the manager of that team. So I'm meeting all of these guys, and Broglio keeps asking, anybody got a bed? And finally he meets a guy whose name some of you know, Steve Barros. Okay? Steve Barros, who became a manager, a major league manager, said, yeah, I got an extra bed in my room. My roommate just got called up, so you can see where it's going. I spend the weekend, spend a couple of nights in Barros's room, and go out to the ballpark with the team, ride the bus and everything. As I'm getting ready to leave, I say to Steve Barros, so, by the way, whose bed was I sleeping in? The guy, he said, my roommate left an hour ago, got on a plane to go to Cincinnati. And I said, whose bed was I sleeping in? And he said, oh, you'll hear about him, just like you'll hear about him. His name's Johnny Bench. So, Bench left in the morning, I rolled in the afternoon. I can forevermore say I slept in Johnny Bench's bed.
When the Mets started training at St. Pete, the Yankees went to Fort Lauderdale.
That's right.
Did you ever go with the Mets to Fort Lauderdale when the Mets played the Yankees?
No, that would be a long trip. That might even be an overnight trip.
Yeah, be across the state.
Yeah, I did not do any overnight trips, and I did not go to Fort Lauderdale.
As a kid, my father took me and my brothers to the Yankee spring training several times in the early mid-'60s. And I would hang out, the visitors would come out of the visitors clubhouse and go to their bus. And you could catch them right there and would get autographs. And one time, the Mets were there one afternoon, and I was getting various autographs, and here comes Casey Stengel, and he refused to give autographs to anyone. And my mother, not to be denied for her little son John, went up into the bus, and I got Casey Stengel's autograph, and like Natalie Marison's autograph, I was talking about the other day, I don't know where it is, but I remember...
Oh yeah, I remember that day.
Casey Stengel said, as my mother climbed up into the bus, he said, why don't these people leave me alone?
Yeah, even back then, I mean, you see it today and it's crazy. And even back then, it got overwhelming sometimes. Yeah. And I go every year to the Hall of Fame induction ceremonies. I went 25 consecutive years. Anybody go to those? Anybody been there?
Yeah, up there with Ripken and Flynn.
Yeah.
75,000.
75,000. I've been 25 years, I go to the induction ceremonies. So I was there the year that Lou Brock was inducted. And I was in a crowd of people as the players were going up to the stage. They were walking by, and as Brock walked by, I didn't even think about this. It just spontaneously erupted from me. As Brock walked by, I yelled, "It should have been Ernie Broglio!" Which is the most ridiculous thing you could possibly say about their two careers. And everybody's around me going, "What is he talking about?" But for me, it was like, my guy didn't get in the Hall of Fame, and this guy did.